Good afternoon and welcome along to today's webinar hosted by us, Felgains. The webinar is on the benefits of implementing powered bed and stretcher movers, the East Kent story. With me today, so I should say my name's Lee Sherwood. I am the Acute Patient Handling Advisor here at Felgains. And with us today to carry out the presentation is Sharon, who is the Senior Moving and Handling Coordinator at East Kent Hospitals University NHS Foundation Trust. And just to go over some quick housekeeping, we should be here today for about an hour. As I said, Sharon's going to run through her presentation, and then I'm just going to go for a very quick overview of a couple of the Felgains bed and stretcher mover range models that we have behind me. And then there'll be time for a live Q&A. Now, what I would like to ask you to do is, as we go along, is to pop your questions into the Q&A section in the webinar, and we'll pick them up, and either myself or Sharon will pick them up towards the end in the Q&A session. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Sharon, and she can start her presentation for you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me nicely. And for those who have met me before, welcome back. It's lovely to see you. And for those who haven't, just to give you a little bit of background, most of you that know me, I am very, very proactive about making change. It really, really is important that we look at what we're using, how we're using it, and why we use it. And to tell my story around that is around bed movers and the issues that we've got. So as Lee said, if there's any questions, please wait to the end. We're happy to answer any questions. So moving forward, when you see the signs at the top, obviously where you see East Kent Hospitals, that is my hospital that I work for, and RQS is my private company that I work with to help support other hospitals when they need support with risk assessments and anything like that. Not training, it purely is business cases and risk assessments. Our objectives today is musculoskeletal injuries, so looking at from pulling and pushing forces, and the manual handling risk around pushing and pulling beds. So I'm sure this probably relates to most of you, I'm sure, seeing these beds moving up and down the corridors. And most of us, to be fair, have got the Nightingale hospitals, very narrow corridors, not a lot of space, and there's usually a lot of equipment in the corridor. Even though we don't want it there, it will still get dumped there, even though the health and safety officers scream at everybody. The impact on the staff and the injuries from that, and the benefits we got from moving over to mechanicalization of moving our beds and the implementation of that, and the barriers that we got from it as well, because nothing is ever straightforward as you'd like it to be. So we're just going to have a brief look at the statistics and why we started to do this, because within our trust itself, we had lots of issues around people being injured, lots of data incidents and so on. So I wanted to look a bit deeper, and everything is about proving what it is you need. So key figures, 477,000 workers suffer work-related musculoskeletal injury. We know, guys, this is the biggest one for us. For those that are manual handlers out there will know it's the one that gets us every time. 61,000 of those reported to RIDOR. So which means under the HSC, we have to do something about it. It's logged. They want to report. They want to know how we dealt with it, what we've done to change it. And 36.8 million workers lost days due to work illness. That was a cost of 18.8 billion in 2019 to 2020. Now, although that was 3 years ago now, I'm sure that's gone up post-COVID. That's a lot of money spent. And when you start looking at equipment, it makes you wonder, why do we argue then? If that's what we're losing, that's how much we're spending, why are we arguing? So using all of this data, I built this business case to change the way we work at East Kent. So what are musculoskeletal disorders? Well, they're the largest contributing factor to occupational health diseases and burdens, largely related to ergonomic factors found in the workplace. So that comes under, and at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, you've got all your references. So any of you can link onto any of those to see and pull up the information that I've put here today. So the most common one is the one that happens to us, that's the chronic and the cumulative one, the one that builds up over time. So most of us, again, won't notice it. We'll get a bit of a backache, bit of a neck ache, and we'll give it a rub. We'll take a tablet for it. We might have a bit of a stretch out and go to the gym, but 2 days later it's back again. And we're not looking at what we're doing. We're just assuming, oh, it's just the job. So we want to take that deeper and have a look more closely about how that's happening. So it's a combination of those time factors and contributing factors as we go forward. So we're aware that awkward postures, static postures up against force and repetition is one of the biggest ones. We're looking at the cumulative effects, the pushing and pulling of the beds. So we start off with fatigue. Most of us will suffer with fatigue first of all. We'll be tired from what we're doing because we're doing it over and over again. Then we start to get a bit uncomfortable because that muscle's being overworked. Your muscles have got lots of memory, as we're all aware, but over time, as it becomes uncomfortable, it starts to retract, it starts to tighten on us, and then we start to get other factors. We then start to feel the pain, injury, and then the disability. It is a shame that we get to the disability before we make the change. It's, we go through all of those factors. And again, I was no different. I'm sure all those years ago when I had a backache or a neck ache, I popped a pill, stretched it out, went to bed early, felt better the next day and just got back on with it, but didn't look at the risk, at the bigger problem. And for us, for pushing and pulling these beds, they're really, really heavy beds that we're moving. So taking our story a bit further, I just want to give you a bit of an understanding about our hospital itself. So we're a 5-hospital site. We have got 1,400 beds within our hospital space, and probably a few more than that at the minute because most of us are at capacity with our bed spaces due to issues of discharge as well as managing patients internally. And we've got 10,500 staff. All sites have slopes and tight corridors. As I said earlier, the Nightingale effects are quite a small area to work in. So when we look at our demands with our jobs, it's to include the stresses placed on the employee as a result of their job itself. So they can't not do it. So if we want to move a patient from one side of the hospital, maybe going down to X-ray, we need to move that patient in their bed or their chair or whatever equipment is. It's not just about the standard size of our patients, it's the obesity of our patients as well. So we've got bigger patients, bigger pieces of equipment that we're going to be moving. So we started to see this trend in back and neck problems as we went forward. Staff would include manual pushing of trolleys or beds frequently over a long distance. So I'm sure, I don't know what size your hospitals are that you work in, but ours, from one end of the hospital to the other end of the hospital, is a lot of pushing of beds on a daily basis. So the average bed stretcher weighs about 150 kilos. An average bed weight of a patient on that is 78 kilos, which means we're looking at 228 kilos on a flat surface. This is not on an incline or a decline. We have, as I said, 1,400 beds, and it could be moved at least 100 times a day. So this was just a picture taken. I did get the permission from this lovely porter allowed me to take this picture. Of the poor posture. So you'd say, well, actually, why is he standing at the front and not at the side? Why is his arms back as they are? So potential rotary cuff injury there, elbows are away from the body. The back is slightly arched at that pulling forces. So he's now got forces going onto those lower compressed discs of his spine. Porter feels comfortable like this because, one, he can't get alongside it anyway if he tried, because there is no space. So he's pulling at the front and the other person is pushing from behind. No matter how many times, I'm sure you've all had this, you've gone out and says, look, even if there is space, don't push the bed in that way. Stand beside the bed. You've got the steering mechanisms of the bed. You've got the height to use on the bed, but yet you'll still see this happening. So what we did is to prove through our business case why we needed this. We did some pulling and pushing force reading meetings. So we looked at the forces measured up against newtons, and the graph with the beds in moving position. So we've measured it first of all. We didn't just do beds, we did other things as well. We did cages and chairs and everything. But I'm just generally going to talk about the beds at the minute, because most movers you can actually attach to your cages to other items that you're going to be moving. So it's worth thinking about. So when we look at the empty bed with the pushing forces, and I've listed some of the beds that we use. So we've got the E2s. So the empty bed on moving is actually quite low. But when we start, and that was just a pushing force. When we start looking at the same bed with the pulling force, it's slightly greater. Not much, but it was. When we start to put patients in these beds, so if we go to the other end of the scale and we look at the patient in the UXNO bed with pushing, look how high that's come up. Look how what that as 97 newtons of force on that individual. So we then decided to look at it in more detail. So we're going to do stop and start. And this will be most of us when we're doing something, because we've got visitors walking up the corridor. We've got other obstacles in the corridor and possibly even patients. So we have to stop and start, especially if it's on an incline as we're moving. And I couldn't believe that when we did this reading, we looked at the UXNO with pushing the bed. Now, this was just the UXNO low bed. This is not the bariatric bed. This was just the low bed. And it came up to 135 newtons of pushing the bed itself. Now, that's just one bed being moved. We don't have hundreds and hundreds of porters, so 9 times out of 10, it's the same porters doing the same tasks. So we started to get a picture about why this was happening and what the effects were. Even right down to the empty bed of stopping and starting was much greater than the continuous movements. And most of you, if you've done any studying with pushing and pulling and the newtons, you'll know it's easier to keep moving than it is to keep stopping and starting. So we're looking at the risk factors. So I wanted to do a risk assessment to understand and put all this information into the risk assessment. So staff need to be involved with the risk assessment, because there's nothing worse if you do a risk assessment and then go away and deliver it back, and then you get the arguments with the team because they look at you, don't know what you're talking about. You don't do the job. So when you're involved with it, they intend to want to work with you. And this is what we did within our trust. We included those porters. We wanted to understand what their problem was. We listened to what they've got to say, because at the end of the day, they're a valid member of our team. When our wheel is turning, every cog in that wheel needs to turn to keep the system working, to keep our teams all happy and working together. So we involved them within the risk assessment. Staff also need to be included in the trials. I'm not sure whether you guys do this as well, but you know, there's nothing worse than you get a team looking at pieces of equipment going, yeah, that's fantastic. This is how we want to do it. And then when you get the equipment out there, they look at you and go, well, we ain't using that. Never seen that before. Nobody likes change. It's very, very difficult to implement something if you haven't involved the people who've got to use it. And I'm sure this rings a bell with a lot of you, where something's turned up and you went, well, they haven't got a clue what we do, because if we did, we wouldn't have bought us that bit of kit. So the processes need to be looked at, and the equipment needs to highlight the ways it's going to reduce its musculoskeletal injury, so the research around it. So this is what our risk assessment would look like. So you can see at the top of the assessment, I've got 3 coloured scores on there, and I love colour. For those of you who know me as well, I'm a bit of a pain about data. If you can't prove you need it, you're not going to get it. Money isn't as easy as we'd like it to be. So we have to make sure that if we're spending this money, it's spent in the right area, and you need to prove why it's being spent. So on our risk assessment, we included some of the, and this is actually a true risk assessment, I've taken some of the data out. So we looked at the pulling and pushing forces, and we've also looked at the red score at the top is 1 porter pushing a bed through a hospital. And you may say, well, actually, none of our porters would push that on their own. You can bet your bottom dollar when you ain't there at night, you won't see that. If they need to move it, they're going to move it if they're less staff. So we need to reduce that as reasonably practicable as much as we can. So we then looked at the risk assessment with 2 porters pushing it, taking account of the newtons and pulling and pushing forces of stop and start. We took it to the worst case scenario, because that's what most of us would do. And then we really risk assessed it with 1 porter pushing the beds with a bed mover. And that brought it down into the green, quite a low level, very, very low force altogether. It was just a matter of connecting up the machine itself. So we made sure we covered all the tasks, the TILE, which is our manual handling risk assessment, and the load and how it affects them. And then we looked at the risk score itself. So as you could see from the red, it actually states that we need to be doing something about it. We need to look at equipment. We need to identify why we need to make those changes. The risks, some levels of assistant need to be put in place. So we did that by putting 2 people there. And then we reduced it as far as we can down to low by bringing the bed movers in. So it was getting quite exciting. I really do need to get a life, guys. For those of you who know me, I do need to get a life because I get excited about this stuff. Because if I can make a change and see a smile on someone's face, how I've changed their working life, and they go home feeling much happier than they did when they're at work, I'm doing my job. And that, I think, I'm really passionate about. We drive that, I think, through the back exchange. I think it's really, really important that we all follow that. So from that, we then started to look at a business case for the equipment. Because we've put all this in place, and we'll be told, well, you need to put the risk on the risk register because it's a high risk. Well, it sits on the register until we need to prove its worth. How can we get it off the register? What can we do? So I put a business case in place. I collected all the information on the costs. I collected information on how many staff needed to move the equipment. I mitigate the risk by weighing up the risk to the patient and to the staff itself, and the cost, time and trouble. So we needed to get it as low as possible, looking at all consequences and how we can avoid what it is we're going to do, yet not stop. We can't not move these patients. We can't say we're not going to do it because we haven't got the equipment. So I then done some research for my business case, and I went to occupational health, and I looked at how many staff had gone through occupational health who were porters, EME, or anybody moving beds. And I looked at the referrals, so pushing beds, pushing cages, all of these. And we were coming up with porters coming back from surgical procedures of having a hernia repaired, or staff coming back with prolapsed discs from what it was that they'd done. And what actually amazed me the most was you had a return to work phase, but nobody was looking at you returning to work to the same job, but nothing's being put in place to reduce the risk. Now, go back in the day of the dinosaurs, for those of you like me who've been around for a good few years, doing this job for 26 years, we didn't have equipment, so we physically had to move this. Today, it's not like that. The equipment does most of it for us. So all of this data was collected to be put into my report. Within my report, I also want to make sure I'm sending it to the right people. There's no good me sending it to just the team managers, because above them are the people who are carrying those purse strings. So I made sure I copied in the legal team so they could start looking at how much is that going to cost if we keep paying out on litigational costs for injury. How much is it going to cost when we've got 2 staff doing this task instead of 1? And the financial burden on the trust itself when we haven't got the staff to move the beds at all. So the implications around that. So all this report needed to make sure we get the right heads around the table talking. So when we looked at the accident and legal cases, over a 12-month period, we had 7 incidents reported, 1 on Rydor reported pushing and pulling beds. The Rydor incident was actually the one where the member of staff had a prolapsed disc and was off for weeks. The risk reductions, we move a bed with 2 staff. That's what we put in place on the back of the Rydor. 3 legal cases and 3 actions against the trust. Minimum payout for one of those was 12,000. Weren't quite sure what the other 2 were because it wasn't stating. And 3 impingement injuries on the shoulder through beds too high, and as my porter was doing, as you could see, where their arms were backwards and they were pulling as much as the person. When they're pulling those beds, the person behind only needs to stop the bed for a second because he could see something happening, and that pulling force on that shoulder blade would actually put an awful lot of pressure there. When we started weighing up those costs, the average pay scale of a porter, band 2, is 21,000. So £10.95 an hour. To move 2 beds, we're looking at 2 staff at 42,000. Now, this is not saying we don't need the porters. I'm not saying that at all. You know, we need those porters. We need those staff doing that. What we're saying is when we weigh that cost of taking another porter away from another job to repetitively do the same thing at the cost of a bed mover, we can actually reduce those costs, putting that porter where we need them. So all of that was in my case. We looked at the time and the balance, how many staff needed to undertake the task, and the benefit of the equipment up against the cost of the injury. And I say, any of you have been to my webinars before, or any of my podcasts I do, you constantly will hear me talk about the no risk assessment, no risk. If you've not done the assessment, you've not got no risk. So it does need to be weighed up. So I've brought a few pictures in here for just to give you an idea of bed movers. So this one in particular, I know Lee's going to go into this in more detail, and he's aware of these more than I am, because we don't have these one yet, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to look at them, because I've got some ideas when I've looked at this, and I was quite excited with what I saw. Again, I need to get a life. For 500 kilos, it's quite a slim line. Ours isn't like that. Ours has got the claw effect because they clip round the bed, so we have to have our claws changed on a regular basis. But it goes under the bed, so and as long as the bed's got clearance. If your bed hasn't got clearance, then you can look at your 600. It fits round the bed. So this one's almost like a claw action one, fitting around the bed itself. And then you've got your bariatric one, which I love this, because how many of you are trying to move bariatric beds? Now, someone said, why don't we just buy the powered beds with powered movers in it? Yes, that's possibly a way that we are thinking about going forward for the future, but that's all relatively new equipment coming in now. That wasn't in a few years ago when we bought our bed movers in. So that is starting to change. But then you've also got to look at the complexity of servicing and managing those equipment. That's not me saying that's not a good product. That's an amazing product. But if you've already got movers, maybe you need to look at the type of mover that you're using or how you're using it. So when we purchased the bed movers, so hallelujah, we put all this business case into the trust. I put all the costings in. Believe me, I had arguments upon arguments. And sometimes you feel a bit downtrodden and worn out, but I'm like a dog with a bone. I was not giving up. I was going to prove that they need to make this change. And they gave me the funding to replace all the bed movers. So funding was given, bed movers purchased. Porters wanted to use 2 staff. They didn't want to go and use the bed. They didn't want to change. They couldn't see what the problem was. They couldn't understand what I was complaining about when I talked about their posture. And even when I said, how many of you got children? What do you do when you go home and you can't move? You know, how do you feel when, you know, you're in so much agony and your son wants you to play football with them and you can't do that? Or equally, the trust says, I don't need to pay you sick pay because we've supplied you with a bed mover and you're choosing not to use it. So we need you to get them on board a bit more, work with them and try to get them understand why we were changing it. So competency training came in and we worked very, very closely with those teams. We now have over 40 bed movers in our three acute trusts. I said we had 5. There's only 3 that we've got the beds on. 3 acute trusts. Clinical staff and porters are on all now completely trained. And what I really love about this is we had new beds in, so we had to have all the claws changed. I don't know what happened, but for some reason, the business case for claw changes didn't happen as it should, and it sat on someone's desk. Not pointing fingers, it happens. Not on my desk, I'll have you know. Not that I'm whiter than white, but it wasn't. And so it sat on their desk for ages. So all the beds had to be then start to be moved around by pushing. Our porters filled an instant report in every single day because they suddenly started to realise all those years they were using the bed mover, suddenly they couldn't use it. So the day texts were flooding in. Honestly, I was so happy. I couldn't believe it. Really, as I say, I'm really sad on things like that because it showed it worked and our porters were really happy. I'm pleased to say now most of our bed movers are all up and running again and they've all been adapted. Got a few issues, but nothing that we're not resolving. So it was a real success story as far as I'm concerned. And I couldn't have honestly done that without this team. This is the team that worked with me. This is my manual handling team. Now, again, a lot of you are going to say, Sharon, there's only one of me. That's all. I do all the training. I do all the risk assessments. I only got that team through proving why I need it, to prove how we're needed and how important manual handling is. How many of us realise that manual handling is at the forefront of staff and our patient safety? And that's one thing I will push. So it's just a quick overview of what happens at East Kent Hospitals and the way we work. I must admit, I did say I looked to the rest of my team how lovely they look. I look a bit like an Oompa Loompa in that. I haven't been on holiday. I just colour up very, very quickly in the sun. But I look like a bit of an Oompa Loompa by the way I'm shaped. And my team actually laugh at that. So that's what they keep calling me at the minute. So I'm now going to move over back to Lee. And I'm going to get Lee to do his overview. But thank you very much. And I'll take questions at the end for listening to me.
Thank you, Sharon. You do not look like an Oompa Loompa. Let's just have that on record. I've known you for a while. I've never thought Oompa Loompa. I've thought some stuff, but I've never thought Oompa Loompa. That wasn't one of them. Right, so as Sharon said, we're just going to have a quick look at the bed movers behind me here. So on my right is the GZS, and on my left is the GZ10SL. As Sharon said, that's a slimline version. Let's talk about the similarities between them. They both operate on a throttle on either side. On either side of the handles, there's one throttle that moves it forwards and backwards. They both have an emergency brake. So if you reverse the unit into yourself, there is a button on the back of it that depresses and actually pushes the bed mover and the bed or whatever is attached to it forward, so it avoids crushing injuries. As we go over to the GZ10 SL, this is a really slimline model, and we trialed it at a hospital last week, and we can actually get the bed mover and the bed into a lift. This doesn't actually stick out much further, depending on the bed you've got, much further than an APAM pump on the end of the bed. So it's actually really slim. As you can see here in a profile, it's really tiny. There are a couple of different hitches that you can use between the two products. This one has an adaptive gripper hitch for a specific bed called an HR 900 Hill bed, whether or not anybody on the webinar has those. But this is an automatic hitch. So you bring this in underneath the bed and then you raise the hitch up. And as you raise it up, this jaw locks on the bar, which is holding the head or the footboard, which means it's really, really quick and really easy to use. You can move the hitch up and down using buttons on the side of the unit, and it has 3 speeds as well. So you can adjust the speed. So if you're going around a corner, you need a bit more finesse. You have it set slightly slower, and then you've got the range of control with the throttle. This has a safe push and pull load of 500 kilos. What's really important to note with that 500 kilos is that's rated on a 6-degree slope. So not only will it pull and push on a 6-degree slope, it's really important that it will stop on a 6-degree slope and support that weight. So it supports the weight if for some reason someone has to let go of the unit or stop or can't push anymore or something's happened. If you let go of the unit, it rolls a little way and then comes to a very gentle stop. Because if you think about it, if he stops immediately, you get a really kind of harsh stop. It's a bit like pumping the brakes really hard in your car, so it comes to a gradual stop. This one has a tine on it, the silver piece here, and the drive wheel actually is here on this unit, and that basically turns your bed without a powered fifth wheel into a bed with a powered fifth wheel. It's very natural for porters, very, very easy to fit in with how they normally operate. It will work in exactly the same way as it would work if they were pushing the bed. And that powered fifth wheel means that even with a bed mover attached, you can spin the bed 360 degrees without removing it. If we go over to the GZS here, the GZS has what we call a split tine, which is 2 of these arms that go around. So if you're looking at bed movers, this is probably a good solution if you have a combination of different beds in your bed fleet. This will accommodate lots of different models because Sharon was just talking about the E2, the Eleganza 2 is a column lift bed, and because of that, it doesn't have the room underneath for you to be able to put the model, the GZ10, which has the time. Also, I think there has to be a nod into the direction that beds are going. We're seeing more and more ultra low ward beds. Sharon mentioned the Amano range. Innova also have something coming out with a low bed. We've got the MMO range from Mestron, that kind of thing, where you're looking at kind of a dual functionality, like a standard ward bed that goes very low to help reduce those falls incidents. So this works really well for lots and lots of different applications because it fits around the bed. So it gives it a bit of a hug and you don't need the space underneath. So a good rule of thumb, I suppose, would be that if you've got a problem getting a hoist underneath the bed, you might have a problem with this model. If you don't have a problem getting a hoist underneath the bed, then, sorry, if you do have a problem with getting a hoist underneath the bed, then this is the model for you. This is a slightly different hitch. This hitch works on a strap, and that strap again goes around the bar that the head or the footboard, that holds the head or the footboard. And because this is called a flex hitch, because it's so flexible, this hooks underneath and then grabs on to the bed or stretcher. It means it can work with a huge range of products. One of the things we've also asked the manufacturer, and they're looking at, is if we can get one of a hitch specifically to push your Bristol-made type portering chairs. You know, that you have the coin operated or whatever, because sometimes if you've got a bit of a slant, those are an issue. This one actually steers slightly differently, and it steers from a handle at the back. So you steer here, and that has a slightly higher safe working load or slightly higher push and pull, which is up to 600 kilos. We do have the GZ Barry as well, which has a push and pull up to 800 kilos. But again, I think we need to, as a business, we need to be aware of what the market is doing. And for bariatric beds, in particular, you're looking at ultra low beds kind of being the norm because of the patient group. And because of that, the GZ Barry couldn't get the time, the single piece like this underneath it. So we can get hold of that. But kind of initial thoughts are that the GZS, this unit here, is the one that you would use for a bariatric bed. Having said that, 500 kilos is actually pretty good for the GZ10 SL, and it may be that that would meet your requirements as well. So that is a brief overview. This is your chance to ask those questions. I know that I've always got about a bazillion questions whenever I talk to Sharon. So it's always good sometimes when you've got a bit of her time to fire something out. But does anybody have any questions or anything that they would like to ask, or any, you know, for me or Sharon to go through in a bit more detail? So Sharon, there's one here for you. Hi Sharon, could you tell me how long your case took from start to finish? We have the situation here at SASH Acute Trust, 5,000 staff, that the theatre porters have been removed to save money, and lots of staff getting MSK injuries from repetitive bed moving. I'd like to start the process here to do a business case, but would like to know the length of time, cost of trial, measuring, etc., and who would you suggest as stakeholders involving in the process? I'm thinking health and safety, porters, OH, and manual handling trainers, link trainers would start. Would it be possible to pay you a visit? Yeah, so I'll take that over to you, Sharon. I'll let you handle that.
Yep, no, definitely happy for you to come over and pay a visit and see what we're doing and how we've done it. Yeah, it wasn't an easy business case, but it proved, but it is all about that documentation and proving why it's worth. So the first thing I'm going to be looking at is with your MSKs, I would contact your legal team. I'd find out from your legal team how many of those have become legal cases. And there's your starting point. And then you want all the directors involved in that, because at the end of the day, they have a duty of care to every member of staff, no matter who they are, whether it's porter, whether it's a nurse, they've got that duty of care. And I see it quite a bit. It's almost sometimes a bit like a bullying culture. I don't stand for any of that. At the end of the day, it's all about the documentation. It's all about how can we protect the staff? How can we prove to the trust it's the best thing for them? And so you definitely need, in your business case, you need the legal team, you need the senior management teams, you need health and safety first and foremost. And if they're not listening, you need a HSE involved in that, because they're ignoring the regulations around how we should be implementing equipment to make those changes. And once we've done that, so for start to finish, my business case probably about 2 months when it started. The first lot got turned down when I did all the risk assessment and got told it's on the risk register. So that's when I went out again, as I said, dog with a bone. I went out again, and then I started taking photographs of the porters and what they were doing, and then wrote the report and took pictures and sent that back up. And once they got that, they then gave me the money. And we start, and now we're there on a replacement program, so automatically. So happy for you to come down, happy to support anything that you need that I can.
Perfect. Thanks, Sharon. Mark Collins, the question is, will this work with RJ beds, including double caster plus size bed? We have an access ramp. What is the maximum gradient the bed can be used for? So it's a 6-degree incline. We're happy to come along and measure it for you and even trial it with the beds that you have. The RJO beds in question are likely to be, and you can let me know, I don't know, well, I don't know, people may still have Contura, people may still actually have Contura 560s. That's not kind of out of the realm of possibility. So normally you're looking at Enterprise 5000X, Enterprise 8000s, it would work with those. And for the bariatric bed, RJ supply a couple of different bariatric beds. There's one called a Barros and another one called the Citadel Plus. Yes, either would work with the Barros, and I think depending on the model, you may have to go for the GZS on the Citadel Plus because there are a couple of different options. I hope that answers that question. Do kind of pop any following questions on the chat. Alison Thomas has asked, are they battery operated? Yes, they are battery operated. At the moment, the 2 models that we have run off of a lead acid gel battery. However, it is really likely that we're not going to sell any of those over here, and we will just change them all to lithium polymer batteries, so you can have an opportunity charge and you can charge them for a bit longer. That has historically been a bit of an issue with bed movers. Gareth Evans. Gareth, it's really difficult for us to show you the speeds, but I would agree they're not quicker. They're not designed to be quicker. The quicker you make it, then the more risk perversely you put into the system. You have something weighing upwards of 500 kilos going 10 miles an hour powered. That is something slightly different than if you were pushing it and not quite getting to those limits. If it is speed you're after, I have to be really honest, and I'll ask Sharon her opinion as well. That this isn't about speed. This is about reducing risk. So it depends what risks you have and what risk it is that you're trying to manage. Val Phillips, hi Val, nice to see you here. We have many heavy doors along the corridors. How does a bed pusher help in your experience to alleviate overstretching to open the door and pushing a bed through multiple doorways? Again, Val, it doesn't really manage that risk other than the fact that you're not going to have somebody holding onto a bed. You probably still need 2 porters, but you're not going to have somebody holding onto a bed and then kind of crashing through backwards and then things bouncing. What will change is that second person will be able to stand as a proper doorstop for one bed or for one door and maybe hold the other door as the bed passes underneath. That won't stop the overstretching. And again, it's not that I would love you to buy thousands and thousands of bed movers, but maybe the business case there is slightly different, and that what you're looking for actually is paying somebody to open the fire, keep the fire doors open. I mean, or have doors that open themselves. Sharon, what are your thoughts on that one? It's quite complex.
Yeah, definitely. We have got the same issue, Val. So we've got doors all over the place. However, the good thing about it was, as I said before, that most doors, once they're opened up, then the bed mover, a porter will go back, push the button and through, where before they were trying to hold the door open, as Lee said, and trying to get through it. But also what we've done up through the corridors now, we've got, and they've only just started to do this to all the doors, they've got the fire locks on them. So they're open for a period of time, then they close automatically afterwards after a period of time. So we've started to do that as well. But that took some years to do. And just answer back to your question, Lee, when you was talking about time and speed. Yeah. I understand where that question is coming from. So if we were looking at from an emergency environment, so let's just say someone's being rushed to theatre, yeah, we wouldn't even go there with a bed mover. We are going to have 2 people on that bed to get that person wherever we've got to go in a hurry. But that's a one-off every now and again. We're talking about the repetitive day in, day out, 100 times a day, moving beds around the hospital from clinic to clinic down to X-ray. They're the ones. And it shouldn't be about speed, because ultimately in a court of law, the first thing a lawyer would say, time don't come into it when it comes to injury to the staff or the patient. Hope that answers that question. Yeah.
Hi, Sharon and Lee. Do you ever receive comments or complaints from patients and visitors as bed movers can look like you're in a warehouse environment? So from my side, I haven't seen any of that yet. I can say from a previous role where I used to supply bariatric equipment, there was a lot of talk about the bariatric equipment looking different. I think one of the things that we have to realise as healthcare professionals for that and for this is that a lot of times people won't know what something is supposed to look like or not look like. If you're in a hospital every day, you're going to notice something different as opposed to, you know, so again, a hospital bed to somebody that's never seen it is never going to look like it. I remember when I first started, somebody told me a hospital bed had a knee break. I was horrified. I was like, why would you get a bed that broke a knee? You don't need that in your life. And so sometimes it is about that perception that we have internally, but you do have to look after it. What I would say is the comments to kind of relate back to the patients and that kind of person-centered or patient-centered approach is that a lot of people won't like to be pushed backwards. You know, me and my wife have a fight every time we get on a train about who sits forwards and who sits backwards, and I just go and sit in a different carriage. It's loads easier. So that is also something that we need to bear in mind, is whether we're pushing from the head or the foot end. Sharon, have you had any experience of that from looking like a warehouse environment?
No, we actually did have a complaint once with a member of the family who was walking alongside the bed with two porters pushing it, and they were pushing it so fast she felt like she was running to try to keep up. So she made a complaint and said she felt that was a bit unprofessional. But then they had lots to do that day, so they were just getting on with it. But equally, I agree with what you said. We should be looking at our patients when we're moving them from A to B. So ultimately, if we're looking at the patient with a bed mover on it, it is so smooth. Honest, guys, I couldn't believe the difference between a force of pushing and the smoothness of a bed mover. It is so nice, and looking like a warehouse. Actually, it's actually quite nice, because what we did with ours, when we proved our business case at the end, and I wanted to show the trust what they'd spent their money on, so we did a little video of moving it about. And we put music on it, so we look like some private hospital, which is amazing, moving the beds around on these bed movers. So it was good. The only difference with our ones would be that we have a handset on one end and we've got the mover on the other end for control. And that's what I like about yours. That's slightly different there. You don't have that, which is nicely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sharon. Sorry, I've lost my place. Oh, what are the charge times and how long will it last between charges? So as I said, these current models have a gel battery in them. They last for about 9 hours, and it takes about 2 hours to charge them. The lithium-ion batteries that it is likely that we will run with throughout the whole range going forward, they can be opportunity charged. So you can just plug them in like you would your phone, and they'll just top up as they go. And those will take very, I'm not sure what the times on there are. And the lithium-ion batteries, again, I think they will be a bit better lasting. They'll probably last about 12 hours, and I would imagine they'll take about 4 hours to fully charge, but you will be able to plug them in between use. And sorry, I think I missed a question about Stryker patient trolleys. Both models will work on the Stryker patient trolleys. The GZ10SL won't work with big wheels. Probably one of the oddest sentences I've ever said, and I've said so a few, but yeah, so it won't work with the Stryker big wheel, but the GZS would work with all of the Stryker Prime series of stretchers. So let me just move down. Are we bringing these to National Back Exchange Conference? I'm not sure, is the honest answer. We will update you on that. And then the last question I've got there is there any data on the span of the batteries? Can we also be sent the presentation? So just quickly on the lifespan of the batteries, the gel ones are guaranteed for 6 months. I would have to get back to you all on the guarantee on the lithium batteries, and the life of them I would also get back to you on. I can tell you that these are made in Australia, and some of these models are out for sort of 10, 15 years. The GZ10SL, this unit here, has just had some very incremental upgrades. So some of those have been in the field for quite some time. The costs on both, really vary depending on volume. But I think if you had a starting price or a starting figure in mind of around £14,000, depending on options, then that would be a good place to be. There's very little difference in cost between the two options, if I'm honest. And it varies slightly depending on the hitch. You can have a couple of, two hitches per unit, so you can kind of marry them up to multiple different beds and stretchers, and like I say, hopefully portering chairs as well.
Lee, could I just say something? With the single bar one, would that fit on? Because a lot of staff out there probably as well have issues with cages. That looks as if it would go under a cage. Would that? Because porters are pushing our cages around now, and that's my next topic, is to look at how we're going to improve that.
Yeah. So from the trials that we've had, so yes, cages for sure. It involves a slightly different hitch, which kind of makes sense because the hitch, instead of coming up underneath, has to come in from the sides to grab the bars, the uprights. What I would say is, what we want to do here at Fail Gains is build out a trusted brand. And what I would say from that point of view is I don't think that's the solution, Sharon. Because you push from behind the trolley, you're not going to see where you're going. I think you need something with a follow-on handle. We can get them, this company make them, but do you know what I mean? Like if you've got, we've all seen those little trolleys.
No, that makes sense.
You're standing behind it and you're pushing it along, unless we start putting mirrors and it looks like one of those modded out scooters, you're just never going to see around it. So it will do it, but I think it does it in the wrong way. I think you need a follow-on handle that's completely powered so that you can pull them and maybe link them in a chain. Sorry, go on.
I told you I get excited. So I was getting all excited thinking, because ours don't fit to our trolleys. So he's looking at, not our trolleys, our cages. So I was thinking, but yeah, you're right, because they won't see, will they? Although they push cages that are so full, you can't see where you're going anyway. But that's just going to add to it.
Use it on an empty one is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So again, just being honest, like we can get those in. We can send on the details of specifically the movers that are designed to move those linen trolleys. I think where we'll really see some gains here is being able to attach this, like I say, onto the Bristol-made type portering chairs, that we see moving around, because that will actually be really useful. Val has put in another question. Yes, maintenance contracts can be purchased through. The maintenance cycle is kind of similar to Lola, so we recommend every 6 months, although it's not a Lola product. And one thing I should actually mention as well is that these do work in a different way. It is that ability to push or move a bed or a stretcher from the place that it was designed to be pushed or moved. We're not lifting the bed off of the floor. We're not grabbing the wheels or moving the wheels in any way that they're not designed to be used. I think that was something that I missed off earlier on. I think that may be it. I think we may have done it. We've cracked it, Sharon. We've absolutely cracked it. Just to follow up, like I say, we will be sending out the presentation and a recording to you guys as soon as we can. And if you've got any questions or anything, then do get in touch. Ruben has dropped some links into some videos that we've done about how much the bed movers cost. And if anybody ever needs any trials or anything, or they want to see the product, because I think that really is the most useful thing, is to put it in your environment and for you guys to use it where it's going to be used, because it's not for us to tell you what is the right piece of equipment. It's just for us to provide you with some solutions. Is there anything else you would like to add, Sharon?
Just the reference list at the back here. So if anyone wants to look up anything that I talked about today, or any stats or anything else like that, please feel free to look at the reference list. But no, I really enjoyed doing this presentation, because I love it when we can make a change. But thanks very much for attending. Yes, thank you all. And that's it. We'll leave you to it. Thank you for your thanks as well. And we'll hope to see you all soon, some other time, for another webinar. Thank you very much.